getting the fiscal discipline, sort of cutting out programs that have been, past their prime, those that are characterized as legislative initiatives, lambs. So eliminating a lot of programs, cutting spending to get to balance.
Now, one of the things that the budget does propose is that we get back to what, at least, I don't know if I'm using the phrase right, but we get back to what government's supposed to be about, something to that effect, it states?
Core functions.
Okay. And one of the core functions, you would agree, is public safety?
And the governor has said that.
All right. And one of the functions or one of the aspects of public safety is corrections, right?
And the governor strongly believes that as well.
All right. Now, in one of your slides here at slide 22, it depicts the corrections complement versus the rest of the state government. Do you see that slide?
Yes.
All right. And the green line is corrections going up.
Yes.
The blue line is the rest of the state going down.
Yes.
Now that would be, number one, let me ask you this. The increase in corrections would be in line with the government's theory of getting back to the core function, would it not?
This slide is, this is just the facts. There's no value judgment on this slide at all.
All right. Well, let's add another layer.
You could argue that, complement increased as the number of inmates increased.
And that's
a logical conclusion to make.
And that was my next question. So I appreciate you volunteering that information. The last question I have to you is this now. The budget for, the overall budget for corrections, or the proposed budget, proposes an increase in expenditures for corrections?
Yes.
All right. And what is the increase in expenditures for corrections?
I think it's about 1%.
Okay. And are you proposing any wage increases in the budget? Does it get that specific?
The total budget assumes no increase in wages.
The
0% increase in wages.
The total budget statewide?
Yes.
All right. So the Commonwealth's attorney during his opening statement testified that the governor is asking everybody.
I don't testify.
Okay. During his opening statement, made the comment that the governor has asked everybody, all state employees, to help out here, meaning pay freeze. He's asking for a pay freeze. Okay. My question to you is, let's talk about all people that receive a paycheck from the state. The legislatures are getting a pay increase, are they not?
The legislature's budget is flat.
Is what? I'm sorry?
I believe it is proposed to be flat.
Okay.
Or a slight 2% decrease.
All right. They're getting a pay increase by statute, are they not? Okay. That's a yes.
Yes.
Okay. The judiciary, by statute, is getting a pay increase, are they not? All right. What about the executive branch? And I'm not sure what he proposes. Is he proposing pay freeze for the executive branch?
Management employees in the executive branch have not had a pay increase in 3 years, I believe.
Okay. So when we talk about all state employees, all people getting a paycheck, it's fair to say that not all are going to get a pay freeze, correct?
Well, the judiciary has proposed for no increase in funding, and the legislative branch is also proposed for a slight decrease in funding. So should they, fund an increase in any pay, it will be at the expense of something else.
Okay. By statute, the legislatures and the judiciary gets a cost of living increase tied into the CPI, correct?
And they certainly can choose to accept it, or they can choose not to accept it.
Has Governor Corbett proposed legislation to change that?
He has not.
All right. That's all I have.
Does the panel have any questions?
Mr. Secretary, thank you. My name is Sean Belby. I just had a couple of questions. Number one is on slide 9 that you had pointed out, and maybe I'm just reading this wrong, If we go back to that, it looks to me that total expenditures for 2010, 2011 look to be about 24.9. So 24.9 billion. And in the 2011-2012 budget, it seems to be 27.3 billion.
Correct.
Okay, so that looks to me like a $2.3 billion increase
The,
in expenditures.
because of the freeze that we enacted in January, that changes these numbers from the actual enacted budget for 2010-11. So
Okay.
it's not exactly an apples to apples,
But if, I mean,
but total expenditures proposed for 2011-12 would be 27.3.
27.3, which to me seems about 9.4% above 2010-11 numbers.
No, total expenditures for 2010-11 was 28.2. If you include, the federal stimulus funds.
Okay, if you include those, okay. And you said that you'd mentioned 3 years in your testimony. I think this is the first time in 3 years that we've had a budget surplus, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And actually, when you take a look at it, that budget surplus really isn't $505.9 million. It's more like $1 billion, because we're coming off a beginning fund or an ending fund balance of about $500 million.
Not exactly.
No?
And keep in mind, to get us to that 586 million number required, freezing of funds and some other things to get us to that point, and then revenue surpluses on top of that. It's not exactly going to be.
Well, the House Minority Leader
Some of
on...
that 505 million is already calculated in that.
Sure.
586, about 360 million of that is already calculated in that 586.
Okay. Well, there was a question asked by somebody during this proceeding of some witness. I can't remember who asked the question or who the witness was, but the question was, do you read the papers? And it seems that the House Finance Committee Minority Leader thinks there's a $1 billion surplus. He must be wrong then? Or is it how you play with the numbers?
I will say, I've heard discussions about, Marcellus Shale severance taxes, and I've heard it spent 10 times over. I've seen over the past several days, the revenue surplus, and I've seen it spent, 10 times over the last couple of weeks, so, or several days. So, this is the number we're working with. It's
Okay.
based on conservative revenue estimates, which will be adjusted in the coming weeks when the Department of Revenue certifies the next, revenue projection.
Okay. And I wasn't going to ask you any questions about Marcellus Shale, but you brought it up. You said that that the proposed tax in Pennsylvania was going to be one of the most draconian in the country.
I don't think I used that one.
Okay. Okay. Are you talking about what was contained in Senate Bill 1155?
No, what I had referenced was the severance tax proposal that the previous governor had proposed. I did not mention any impact fee legislation.
Well, the severance tax that the previous governor had proposed with Senate Bill 1155 would have set the rate at 7.3%. And Montana, 7.9%. New Mexico, 8.4%. Wyoming, 10.2%.
Those are usually only a component of the tax.
Okay. Now, the other thing is that you said that, you know, the business climate here in Pennsylvania, it's terrible business climate because of, you know, the taxation system. But were you aware that approximately, and the corporate net income tax is 9.99%, which is relatively high, right?
Correct.
But you and I can probably agree that 70% of all wills that are operating in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are owned by companies that are partnerships or LLCs. So they're only paying, you know, the 3.07 personal income tax, aren't they?
Mr. Arbitrator, at this point, I've tried to grant as much leeway out of deference to the panel itself, but I'm not exactly sure how engaging in a policy debate over what could be taxed and what might not be taxed and what isn't taxed and what in their minds should be taxed is in any way relevant to the fact that the budget is the budget, the money is the money, the governor has proposed the budget, that is what it is, and those are the confines with which we must live in.
Well, I'm just responding to the witness's testimony that, you know, the reason that this is why it is because of this corporate net income tax that is so high. And the reality is, and I think the witness knows it, is that these people aren't paying the corporate net income tax. They're paying the personal income tax.
I think that this is a policy debate over what Mr. Welby believes the governor should do.
Well, sir, the entire budget is a policy document.
That's correct, and we are here to try and present evidence to a panel to create a collective bargaining agreement for the association, not to debate over what policies should be implemented to raise new revenue.
Sean stole my microphone, so I can't respond. I don't disagree. I mean, that we can't resolve these policy issues here. I don't mind a couple questions on and going back and forth. I don't think we crossed the line yet. So, you know, if there's a couple questions, that's fine. But governor's not going to let us make the policy. I know that.
I have nothing further. I think the witness has, by his silence, has answered my question.
I just have a couple of questions.
There are about 100 companies that pay corporate, there are 100 oil and gas companies that pay corporate income tax.
Out of 700. That's all.
Pete, but I was struck by one particular slide, number 25. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes.
Am I correct that this shows what the past and projected contributions from the Commonwealth to PSERS and SERS is and will be?
Correct.
Now, if I'm reading this correctly, I'm looking at 1011, where the obligation was for the current year,
About 900 million.
yeah, under $1 billion.
Right.
And on a, if you use a budget of 227 billion, you're talking maybe 1/3%. I'm sorry, no, it'd be 3%, I guess, right? About 3%. You go out to 11-12, and now we're looking at about 1.1 billion, about 4% of the overall budget. And if I take it out to 13-14, I'm extrapolating, that looks to be about 2.4 billion, and now you're about 9% of what the current projected budget is. This is hidden dynamite. Okay, thank you, nothing further.
I just have a couple questions, sir. If I take you back to slide 7, the plan to balance the budget, could you explain to me just a little bit more on the January 2011 budget freeze? Is that essentially payments were stopped being made under this
Correct.
budget? Will they have to be resumed under the, or, you know, is this like putting the bill in the bottom of the drawer? So,
No, they were unexpended and in many cases uncommitted funds that we simply froze and said, agencies, you don't have authority to spend those funds.
okay. And the increase in lapse estimates, I have to plead ignorance on understanding what that is.
Funding that has not been spent in a year, we lapse it.
I got
we
you.
Take it back in the general fund.
Okay.
Now, getting back to the budget freeze, though, 330 million of that was the ability to draw down federal education jobs